But we begin with new weekly tracking numbers from Gallup. It finds that 54% disapprove of the job President Trump is doing, compared to 41% who approve of his performance. CNBC's John Harwood analyzed the source of Trump's support and found in the data that whites with no college degree approve of the president's job, 58 to 39%, while 29% of all other Americans approve, 66% disapprove. So, Joe, the numbers seem to be shifting just a bit for this president.
Well, there's always been, and we've talked about it for some time, that there's always been a bit of a narrow casting. But this is about as narrow casting as it gets. And Willie, all I can say for Donald Trump and Republicans who are hoping, like the special election in Ohio tonight, the Republicans that are hoping that he's somehow going to get them over the finish line, even in strongly Republican districts like this Ohio 12. They just better hope that their small slice of the electorate comes out, because, I mean, Donald Trump is sacrificing just about every other group in America for this one group of white, non-college educated voters that, again, there just aren't enough to get him over the top or to get his candidates over the top in a lot of elections.
Yeah, and that Gallup number of 41% approval is about where he's been over the course of his presidency, but it's that crosstab that you're looking at that's so interesting. Remember, he won white non-college voters by almost 40%, so that certainly makes up the core of his base, Gene Robinson, and those are the people we see out at the rallies of last week, those three big rallies. That is his hardcore support, but it remains to be seen if when he does intervene in some of these elections, like Ohio 12, or when he endorses Chris Kovac, a Republican who's running for governor in Kansas, who the RGA and the Republican Party didn't want him to endorse, it remains to be seen how powerful exactly he is in those races.
Yeah, I mean, what we've learned so far, I think, from the special elections and the primaries is that he's very powerful inside the Republican Party. He is, he's got 89% support among Republicans. So it's very difficult if you're going to run as a Republican in a primary to buck Trump. On the other hand, he is very unpopular among among Americans in general, and Democrats have been doing a whole lot better than one would expect, than anyone imagined from in these elections. We shouldn't be talking about this Ohio special election. This is a safe Republican seat, and we're talking about it because it's a Trumpy-backed candidate who is up against a Democrat who's a moderate who could win.
You know, Mike Barnicle also, again, when you talk about off-year elections, what's so extraordinarily important is the intensity, because most people don't go out and vote in midterm elections. You're lucky if you get a third in the primary and maybe 50% of the voters when you get to the general election. But there was an article this morning that I read talking about how, I think it was the Washington Post, talking about in Ohio, these are rock-ribbed Republicans who voted for Trump. And you had the reporter knocking on doors, and one lifelong rock-ribbed Republican said they asked who they're going to be voting for, and she said, she said, I support Trump. We voted for Trump, but I hate him. Something along those lines. I can't stand him. He's a jerk. We're hearing that more and more. I'm hearing that more and more from the people I talk to. Who voted for Trump. They voted for him. They're embarrassed by him. They don't like him. That's not exactly the secret sauce to get people out to vote in midterm elections. And I believe this ambivalence at some point, and I believe just hating Nancy Pelosi at some point is not going to be enough to help these Democratic candidates, because Nancy Pelosi's not running America.
You know, Joe, there's a real tragic aspect to those numbers that we just indicated in the poll. The fact that he has overwhelming support among largely whites with a high school degree. These are people who need a president standing up for them more than most people in America. And he goes to these rallies, and if you listen to the rallies, I know it's discomforting to listen to his language in the rallies, but he doesn't propose anything to help them. Instead, he relies on grievance. He relies on trying to cement the divisions that already exist in America. He relies on strengthening those divisions. He relies on talking about race. He relies on talking about really hate. And these people who show up are victims of a con. Not all of them are racist. Now, some perhaps are. There's no doubt about that. But they're victims of a con. They need a leader, a president, who will do something about their lives, to improve their lives. That's the tragedy.
Well, you know, Gene, victims of a con, and what I've never really understood for somebody who is in economic trouble, who's somebody who's struggling to get their kids through school, somebody who's struggling to keep a job, somebody who's struggling to get, you know, good, decent, fair wages and the ability to take your kids to a doctor that's not an emergency room visit at 11 o'clock at night. I'm not quite so, I just don't understand why some of these people out in the crowds, they're conned by a guy who talks about himself all the time, lies about himself all the time, inflates what he's done all the time. And then, of course, on top of that, he has convinced a lot of these people that their biggest problem is the media.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're the enemy of the people.
If that's their biggest problem, that's interesting.
Yeah, and look, he is, as Mike said, it's a con. It's been an effective con. The other thing he does before these audiences is make ridiculous promises that are just that will never be kept. He's bringing back the steel industry. They're opening 8 new plants, and that's just simply not true. It's not happening. Yet he says it, and people applaud, and this and that, and he's very skillful at making drawing these cultural and racial lines. And essentially putting people in the position of being with him or with MS-13, basically. And it's a demagogue's toolkit that he uses and he uses it effectively.
And Elise Jordan, to an extent, he chips away at his own credibility when he has policies like the separation policy. He talks about the wall. He talks about immigration in the most, quite frankly, degrading way to people. But some of that is appreciated by the base for whatever reasons. Having said that, isn't it fair to say the policy of taking children away from their families has definitely hurt the president? Nobody likes that. I can't imagine that would poll well.
Well, and Mika, especially women that I've spoken with who are Trump supporters don't support the child separation policy, even if they support Donald Trump. And so John Kasich himself pointed out this weekend that suburban women are going to be really key in this 12th district and in picking who the next congressman's going to be. And so I really am curious what the suburban women of Columbus, Ohio are going to decide to do today in light of Donald Trump focusing more on any distraction that he can throw at the wall to try to turn people away from the real issues that are affecting men and women in this country, namely the families and children who have been separated by his inhumane policy, but also health care and looking at what has Donald Trump done to actually improve health care for men and women of the 12th district.
You know, Jake Sherman, it's very interesting that when Conor Lamb won his shock election, surprise election several months ago, we were talking about the suburbs of Pittsburgh. Now we're talking about another Midwestern town, the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. And if you look at one area where Republicans have been hurt the most, where Donald Trump's lost the most support, the reason why he's sitting at 39, 40, 41%, depending on whether you believe Gallup or Quinnipiac, isn't so much of that the bleeding support that he's seen when it comes to suburban voters, which used to be the absolute bedrock of any Republican presidential campaign.
Yeah, it's a huge problem, and the majority will be won and lost in the suburbs. There's no question about that. I think the important thing to point out here, and what we need to wrap our head around, is if this district is competitive, an R+7 district, a district that John Kasich and Pat Tiberi, the last two congressmen from this district, won by a dozen points or 10 points every single time. If this is competitive, then there are 80 seats in America that are competitive just like this. There are 80 Republican seats in that kind of range that could be on the table come November. So Democrats are seeing extremely rapidly their political map expand to a point where they could, and we don't know, we're just talking based on available information, we could see a massive amount of seats flip if a district like this is competitive. There are suburbs, obviously all over the country, that are less Republican than this that could go. So we're seeing it almost doesn't even matter who wins tonight because it's competitive, and that shows a really huge change in the political fortunes of the Democratic and Republican Party.
Yeah, and Jake, it just shouldn't. Oh, I'm sorry about that, Willie. Jake, it just shouldn't be competitive, right? I mean, this is a race that Republicans expected to easily lock up all along. And any reports of Republicans doing better in congressional ballot tests that we were hearing several weeks back, it seems so much of that has changed. And is there that sinking realization on the Hill among Republicans that this actually is going, despite what Donald Trump says about a red wave, that things are getting worse by the day for Republicans?
Yeah, if you talk to Republicans in the leadership on Capitol Hill, they recognize that this is the cleanest test of their political fortunes at the moment. And the interesting thing, and this hasn't gotten a ton of ink, but in private polling, the president's actually right side up in this district, is not underwater in approval, but the Republican brand and Troy Balderson, the candidate, are so damaged that it is in play, and the Republican policies that Danny O'Connor has tried to and has successfully latched onto have put this district in play. And yeah, there is the realization that this is getting bad. It's getting worse than expected. And the ballot test that Democrats are up, anywhere between 7 and 12 points is actually accurate. And that would portend a massive wave for the Democratic Party come November.
And Willie, again, Donald Trump, again, there seems to be this irrational fear of Donald Trump because he shocked everybody. Nobody expected that he was going to win, and everybody's saying, oh, my God, just wait. He's going to pull a rabbit out of his hat. He's going to. But, again, there's some political realities we have to look at that for you go back, 50 years. And if a president's in the low 40s in his approval ratings, if you've got on the ballot test Democrats ahead 7 to 10, 12 points, there's just no getting around the fact that if the Democrats get their voters out, this is going to be a huge fall for them.
Yeah, and Donald Trump won that district, as Jake said, by 11 points. And in the special elections this year, Democrats have shrunk their margins by 10.5 points against Republicans on average. So this will be because Donald Trump was there last week. Mike Pence has been there campaigning for Balderson. This will be a test of Donald Trump's influence.